Hey everybody, whoa, the camera needs a little bit of, there we go. So we will give everybody a second to join. We're always a late arriving crowd over here. Welcome to Thursday night. Sorry if you were on for the Tuesday night show classics. We had a internet outage. We've had intermittent internet problems over here, and that has led to a number of conversations with our cable company. But I think we're going to be good tonight. They replaced some more equipment. So welcome to this show, and welcome to what I think is going to be one of our most shocking topics ever. But we'll let's see if everybody can just check. Make sure you can hear me just fine. So somebody say hey there, and if you can hear me, we'll see the comments come up in a second. Don't see the comments. Let's see. There we go. Thank you. So, like I said, super shocking topic tonight. I'll give you an idea of the topic we're going to cover, which is, you guessed it, shocks. Now, whoa, our camera doesn't like that, so let's do this. We'll move. There we go. Now, the reason I wanted to talk about shocks is there's a few things. One, we've got to dispel a few myths about shocks. One, springs have one job and one job only, and that is to control ride height. So when we think about the shocks that we use on our cars, whether it's a dirt late model, whether it's SC mod, whether it's a jumpy car, whatever you're going to use that on, shocks have one job, and that is to control ride height. Now, if we go to kind of the theoretical part of it, like we like to do, the idea that a stiffer spring, all that's going to do, a stiffer spring and a lighter spring are going to see the exact same amount of weight put upon them. So when you go into the corner and the car begins to shift weight, a stiffer spring and a lighter spring will put the exact same amount of weight on that tire. And you're like, wait, that doesn't make sense. A stiffer spring should put a lot more weight. Now, what it really does is it controls how much roll that tire is going to see, or that chassis is going to exert. So a stiffer spring will allow for less roll of the same weight. And so if that makes sense. So if you kind of think about it, if we've got the car, when the car pitches to one side, if we've got a stiffer spring here, then it's harder for it to push down. Same amount of force is going into this because we've only got so much. All of the weight is generated from the velocity and the mass. So it's the same. It's going to hit the quarter at the same. And if you've got a softer spring, then it's going to allow for more roll onto that quarter, which typically means you're going to have more bite, and until the point where it can't control that bite, and then you're going to start sliding. Or you're going to have a very stiff spring, which means that the car is not going to roll over as much. All right. Now, why did we talk about springs when we say we're going to talk about dampening? Because they're connected. In fact, they're violently connected. So when we think about the amount of rate of pressure that's being put on, that is the spring's job. The speed at which it transfers is controlled by a couple of things. One is the ability for it to push fluid through the piston, assuming that you're getting relatively fair amount of piston to sleeve. And we'll talk about that in a second when we start showing some pieces, piston to sleeve. So what we're saying is that the holes in the piston are what's going to, or the holes in the collar on the piston are going to be what define the amount of fluid that can go through. So holes and size of holes are imperative to this. Now, those work in concert with viscosity, or the thickness of the fluid. So typically we go from, say, somewhere around, you can go 10 to 90 in most silicone-based shock fluids that we run. Most of us run inside of a band of probably 30 to 60. If you're a little bit thicker than that, There could be some tomfoolery going on, or you're trying to get where the car doesn't unload or load differently. There's a number of things that play into that. So we'll cover those, and we'll cover some of the other kind of things as we get to the pieces. So let's do that. Let's switch cameras, and we want the Ghost. Yeah, no, we'll see what happens with the Ghost. We have a bunch of good things around that. So first off, there's a number of components. I'm going to use, let's say I came into a whole bunch of old HPI shocks. So we've got, these are the old HPI RS4 shocks that we're going to put together. We're going to put two of them together to talk about a couple of different things about them. One, these are exceptionally typical though. This compares out to the same basic body design as you're going to get from the GFRP stuff and about 100 other manufacturers. Now, the couple of things that you want to do is, one, when we talk about dampening, we don't want to pick up any resistance. That's the biggest piece out of this, is that the mechanism itself we don't want it to bind. We don't want a tight spot. We want the same basic mechanical movement through the entire thing. What that's going to force to happen is that we've got the entire then dampening controlled inside of the things that we talked about: viscosity and our mechanical holes and the size of those holes. If we've got binding, if we've got some sort of, like, I don't know, where you've got the O-rings crushed down, all of that is wrong. Rebuild the shocks immediately. And what will happen is you can actually get basically fluid bound. And what that means is you're going to be able to get where the shock won't move in or out, or it'll move in and out in a very unpredicted manner, and you will not get the car around the track very fast. I promise. We actually did this. I actually made a mistake and didn't know how to build custom work shocks a few months ago, and I built a car, put everything together, rebuilt the shocks. We took it up to Indiana, and the car was just complete junk. And what had happened was I'd overfilled the slot shocks, and I was building them like we do the GFRPs, which is completely wrong for those shocks, and because that's an emulsion system. And what happened was the shocks were shock bound. The car couldn't move and couldn't transfer weight properly. We had rebuilt them, and then the car went out. And we were just fine. So, like I said, when we go through these steps, there's going to be a few of them that these are not like, hey, if you get time to polish something or work on something. No, this is important stuff. So let's go to that. Now, the way the HPI shocks build is you basically take two silicon, and these are the old clear silicon O-rings. You may see blue ones, you may see some black ones, but these are what they've had for years. And you're just going to put them inside of this. It'll be basically the same build. Now, there's a couple of variants of it. Some of the GFRP stuff will have a spacer in here. Some other folks won't have a spacer. But basically, everything builds with two O-rings. Now, the purpose of these O-rings is not to act as a dampening product. Again, make sure they're super smooth, and we'll show you a little trick on how to do that. The next thing that goes on is this little, and I think this is actually a Teflon guide, and it goes not in that part, in this little black part. It goes up into here. Now, again, if you're doing GFRP ones, you're going to have two of these guides. They're usually gray, and one's going to go in the body of this, and one's going to go into the end. These shocks don't have, I pushed that in and then it fell out. You see that? So we're going to push this together. And then the guide should come out and it's flush. Now, what that's going to do is when everything's together, the shock then rides on, obviously, the two O-rings and this Teflon guide. Now, one of the things that I like to do, and let me grab it real quick out of the box, is we put what's called this green slime. It's pretty, I mean, this stuff's been around forever. You could use other stuff, but Associated makes some pretty amazing lubricants in that. I think they're actually made by Lucas Oil now, but basically what we're going to do is we're going to take a little bit of the green slime and we're just going to load it in there. And what that's going to do is that's going to act as a lubricant between the, so you get something kind of like that. Now it's going to push right out, right? But what we're looking for is we want just a layer of thicker grease that's going to work as a lubricant over the silicone, so the silicone doesn't grab. And then I go reverse and just kind of put it in there, move it around a little bit, and then we'll go out with the shock in the piston. Now, like I said, there's two types, and you probably won't be able to see this very well. And there's more than this, so you can get pretty creative. But what we've got here is there's a 2-hole system, which will be tough to see maybe on a mobile phone, but you can really see it on the black, and a 3-hole system. I didn't get into it because it's pretty self-explanatory on how to put them in. You got a couple of E-clips. You've got the piston, and we're going to go with, I think we've got, there it is. We're going to go with 2 3-holes here. And all we're going to do is we're going to shove this down through, get that little bit of green slime off the end. And then we have an assembly that looks pretty close to this. Now we're going to repeat that same thing in our second body. So 2 O-rings, our little white top, the black, we're going to screw that on, and then my tube of grease is almost out. The other one, and I don't know if you can still get it, I've got a bottle of Bowlink, and it's a heavy silicone. I actually like that better than the green stuff, but I know there's a few folks that watch this that like the green, so I was going to use this for you guys, but I actually don't use this as often as I use the Bowlink, and then shoves right through. Now, right now, what we would do is we're going to test and make sure that we've got really, really smooth movement, which it does. And then we're going to check the other one. Same deal, just super, super smooth. Now, there are I don't know, probably 1,000 manufacturers of silicone oil and that on the market. You cannot go wrong. This is the industry standard, which is the factory team. This is associated 35 weight. It's made by Lucas Oil in the USA. So if you have your choice, everybody that's won a whole bunch of stuff runs this. Like I said, there's some other brands out there, but rarely will I tell you. There's really only 2 things that I'm pretty adamant about, and that is sticky icky on your tires and associated in your shocks. I think those are the gold standards. Might be some folks that'll disagree with that, but we will throw oil in both of these, and I'll come back and tell you why I'm going to do this both at the same time. Well, because it will take a second to bleed these out. So I'm going to take and shove that one. Oops, it's off camera. Let me show you the trick I just did. I'm going to put it just there. Now, we need to bleed these out. And what that means is we're going to go all the way to the top and basically move it up and down a few times to make sure that we've got all of the air bubbles out. And I think, you can't really see it, but it is really, really super, super clean out of there. So we should be pretty good. Now, here is where it gets interesting, is we have got the black silicone bladders. Now, you don't have to run bladders if you choose not to, but what this does is it basically regulates the pressure of the fluid. Now, there's a few ways of doing that. When we put this on, you can build the shock dead or live. The reason that you would do that, so typically custom work shocks, we build live. The GFRPs, we build dead. HRPs, HPIs, we're going to build this one live. And what that means is that when you shove this in, what we're going to do is we're going to watch the action, and it's going to basically hydraulically push itself back out. Now, the reason that's important is that we want to make sure that we've got dampening in both directions. So what we do is we set this on the top with this hold all the way out, and make sure we don't get any air bubbles. And then we're going to take the lid, put that together, and then we're going to screw this on. And what's going to happen, it's going to leak a little bit out, just a little bit. Depends on how you're going to build this. You can get it where it's going to leak a ton of stuff out, or that one I just got lucky. Now what'll happen is when I shove this in, it will go out. Now the amount of dampening that we have is dependent on a couple of things. One, you could stiffen the bladder, and that's what these little pieces of foam are for. So you could put that in there and it would actually stiffen it going up, because what it's going to do, it's now built a little air bubble above the bladder and a filled silicone bubble below the bladder. And so as we push that in, it's actually flexing that bladder, and it's going to put it in. Now, the other thing we can do is, let me take this apart, is you can also reduce the fill. And what you'll see is that bladder stayed in place. And then let me see if I can actually, we'll just leak a little bit out. There we go. And that's going to slow down the dampening. Now, what you don't want to do is you don't want the shock to be half full or any nonsense like that. So you're going to want to keep it, like I said, within a bandwidth. Now, what you'll see is it'll actually actuate slower. And it's super, super smooth, by the way. So let's leave this one aside. We'll take this one, and we got to bleed it out. Now, one of the reasons that I sat it aside for a while is gravity is also our friend. Since the oil is thicker than the air bubbles, we'll get the air bubbles to rise to the top. Neither of these, somehow I made really good pours. So I've got just a couple of little bubbles in there. And most of them have worked their way out. You can see down in there that somehow we're doing well. So we're going to take, same thing. We're going to put this lid on. We're going to push it over to the side a little bit, bleed a little bit out. And then same assembly. Screw this one together. And if I did it right, they're gonna be at different rates. We'll see. Now, what I wanted to do was build these so that they were at different rates. And what I want to show you is how to check. So basically taking and pushing them both down, if they're built right, you should have essentially the same rebound and speed coming out, which means they'll come to the same distance, and then they'll also come out at about the same speed. So let's see. I think I built one slower, which is what I was hoping to do. No, they're both about the same. So let me do that again so you can see it. So all the way down, and then relax, and you can see we've got the exact same movement, and they're not dragging. They're not kind of ramming into each other or anything like that. And they go out to the same distance. So we've got two really well matched shocks. Now, you can get a little bit more sophisticated on this. You could get a dyno. There's some shock dynos and things like that. But most of the time, when we talk about these, most of the time, you don't really need to go through that. If you've got the same holes, same shock weight, build them the same, You get all 4 or 2 or however you're doing it, and you check them all against each other. Typically, that's going to be good enough. Now, we would go on. I did want to show you this. This is a great tool. This also must be Associated Night. This is an Associated tool. Now, I know Lowe's, a whole bunch of folks make this tool. Huddy makes one. But don't grab the shocks with a set of pliers. What that's going to do, that's going to put in, typically it's going to crack or cut into the shaft, and that's going to give burrs on it, which is going to cut the O-rings, or it's going to leak around that because it's going to expand out the O-rings and let it leak. So use one of these, clamp that in there, and then just thread on the end like this. And I don't know, this is kind of a beginner thing, so I'll go through it because I think a lot of us will know it. How you set your rear droop and how much is based off of this length here. So if I go all the way in, that's going to give me a shorter shock. If I go out, that's going to give me a longer shock. Now, it doesn't change the rate, and this is where a lot of folks, I think, get confused, is it does not change the rate of the spring. In fact, what it does is, and you would have your collar on here, you'd have your spring, the whole, oh, I have a spring collar. I do have a spring sitting right here. You put your spring collar on, and it will change the compression of the spring. And all that's going to do is change ride height. So when the car is at rest, the longer shaft is not going to make a bit of difference at rest. When it is unloaded, it's going to keep that tire on the ground longer. So that's how you set the, well, I guess it's pretty much every corner. That's how you set the droop on every corner on a 10 scale car. And so if you want the car to go more to the front, you can control it with your left rear length right here. So really important tuning tip there, and it helps the car drive through the corner. So a couple of things. One, kind of wrap up, dampening is critically important because what it does, it basically controls, see, I can't even control the spring. It controls the spring going in, which also is going to get some assistance because you're rolling this down. But what it's really doing is it's controlling how fast it unloads because it can slow down that spring. Now, obviously, a big enough, thick enough spring is going to overcome some of that dampening, and you've got ground, you've got a bunch of dynamics working. But basically, that's what the design is for, is that it's going to dampen both directions. So both are equally important. The second thing, make sure you don't have these things in a bind, and go racing when we get a chance to do that. And that's actually how you do the how you do a shock. Now let me go and see if we have any comments. My comments stopped coming in, so hopefully I just didn't do this entire thing by myself here. Let's see. They stopped at 8:46. Is anybody out there? If you can, post up, or you might be seeing them and I can't see them for some reason. If not, it'll be quiet on the comment side tonight. Let me do this. Let me go here and then back. Also, I can check on the phone. Let's see what we got. I can pick it up on here and see if anybody's talking. It's always something around here, right? All right. So let's see. Any comments? I can. All right. Just quiet. It is quiet. So I thought nobody was posting. It literally is that few folks. So anybody have any questions about? Yeah, that's right. Anybody have any questions about shocks or any other thing? Tell of the Ghost. Well, we have a logo for it, and we have got some different things. So if you saw the logo, you can probably chat with a few folks if you want to learn about it, but we are not going to announce anything tonight, Tommy, about the Ghost. But do you run the same weight of oil on all four corners? So it's a tuning device, right? So if there's a whole lot, I would argue, quite frankly, there's more art than science that's fallen into some of this category in this question. So I do. I know others that do not. I know some folks run it lighter in the rear. They'll run some different things left and right. It's all about getting it fine-tuned to your setup. So if you've got a case, and keep this in mind, where you want the traction would typically be thinner oil. And that works to a point where what'll happen is you'll get to a condition that's called springy. And basically the car kind of bobs around. You just don't have enough oil weight in the car. Go back up a couple of things and take the spring out. You also don't want the car diving either direction. You don't want to dive into the rear and just collapse in on itself. You don't want to dive it in the front. So shock weight oil, I would recommend you start 35 all the way around and go down. I wouldn't go below 25 on the rear. In fact, I wouldn't even know when you would go that low. And I probably wouldn't, and maybe the front, and I wouldn't stay out of that, go above those on a 10 scale car. So the answer is yes, sometimes, but it's really driving preference and it's really setup driven. Do you change the oil weights before the piston hole? Yes. In fact, I can't think of too many times that I've heard someone changing the holes in the pistons. Typically, that's going to be around a program. So there are guys that are running a lot of holes in their pistons, and there's a lot of guys that run 2, and there's a lot of things on size. I can't think of a time that I've actually said, oh my goodness, I need to add a 3rd hole. That's a whole nother deal. So yes, fluid before pistons, and typically you're going to run the same pistons all the time as a part of your program. Why would you not recommend going to emulsion, and why? So I've had way more success and background on non-emulsion shocks. And basically what emulsion shocks are, it's a dead shock and you're flooding them. And then what happens when you screw the lid on, you typically take and it just starts pouring oil out. So what it's going to do, it's going to oil pack in, and that's obviously emulsion is full or underwater, right? So when you think about emulsion, basically you're trying to load both sides. Now, what emulsion can do, it can give you better rebound dampening. But on the other side of it, you've got a whole lot of springs, a whole lot of motion going on. And I just hadn't seen the benefit of it. Now, the reason that people do like emulsion is there's an argument, and Tickle's made this one with me many times, is that you can get more consistent shock builds. Doing rebound shocks with the bladder is much, much harder and typically requires more rebuilds to keep where it's the same. So there's some benefits to emulsion. It's just not something that we'd ran very much. Let's see. We've got, why do you build Custom Works different than the others? Because Custom Works shocks, and I wish I would have kept a set. I just sent some stuff off. Completely different shock design than what these are, and they build differently. You build them from the bottom, so you basically fill them up and then you screw the bottom on. Different build, but get up with Max or Tickle, Tyler Price, those guys that are running them. I just don't have any here anymore, so get up with them. I think they make a great shock, and very consistent. For me, I just didn't know how to build them. Reese can build them, but he didn't volunteer doing it for me because well, he's a jerk. And then Tickle just made fun of me. So that was my experience on him recently. I'm kidding, by the way. Reese, not about Reese being a jerk. He's definitely a jerk. Why would you recommend? And then dirt oil weight, start at 35. Bigger cars, much heavier. And I don't know what they're running in the short course stuff. I know when we ran 8th scale, we were running 60, 65, somewhere in there. So I would imagine they got less weight, same speed. They're probably in the 50s and 60s. So any other questions? Let me check and make sure. I got this new program here. I'm not sure I'm getting them all. Looks like I am. So if not, we will call this one quits. A couple of things to let you know. If you didn't watch Classics on Tuesday, one, it was a complete train wreck. Our internet went out about 5 minutes into the show, but we did finish it up. You can find that on Sticky Icky. Pretty cool car. We'll be back on Tuesday with another one, and I haven't settled out on which car we're going to do, but I will take votes. If you go to stickyicky.com, we're either going to do the Hyperdrive STX and talk about pivot ball technology from 1995, or we're going to talk about the Narrow Revolution with the Bowlink wide car. And so we'll do the one week and one the other. And if you guys have a preference, post those up, and we'll talk about why we don't run cars that are like 1.5 feet wide anymore. And if you've never seen the pivot ball stuff, it's a pretty cool car. And so let me, yep, that was the IndyCar that we did this week. Any other questions? We're right at 9 o'clock, and I like to keep these to a half an hour. So I'll give you one last chance. And if not, I'll bid you a fond farewell, and we'll see you on Tuesday with the other show. All right. I don't see anything. Take care, guys.